Okay, so today we're diving into some really important material. It details this alarming rise, frankly, in online threats, even calls for violence aimed at public figures, like J.K. Rowling. Definitely something we need to talk about.
Absolutely. It's stark stuff.
Yeah. So a key theme I'm seeing run through this is definitely that escalating hostility, right? You've got the Bluesky lists, the reactions to the Charlie Kirk assassination discussion. It touches on a lot. Celebrity stuff, history.
It really does pull in a lot of threads, and they are connected, no doubt. But I wonder if, to really make it land with maximum impact, if a clearer narrative structure might help. Let those powerful points breathe a bit more.
Okay, so you're thinking the structure could be stronger?
Yeah, I think so. Right now, it tends to jump quite a bit. You go from specific things like the Bluesky lists, then over to broader cultural points, maybe a personal anecdote, but the transitions aren't always super clear, or there isn't always one dominant theme for a whole chunk.
Ah, I see. So the connections are there, but maybe not explicit enough for the listener, potentially losing some of the punch.
Exactly. It can diffuse that central argument. Like, the discussion moves from Bluesky and Rowling, then you're talking about Chris Pratt and Coldplay getting canceled, then Stephen King's apology, later the whole Hollywood origin thing. And it doesn't always feel like these are clearly building on one specific analytical point at that moment.
Right. Okay.
So the suggestion here is maybe think about organizing it into more distinct focused segments. Each one could really dig into a single core issue or question.
And use clear signposting, Smooth transitions to guide the listener. Make sure every example, every anecdote directly shores up the main point of that segment.
So the passion builds instead of scattering?
Precisely. It builds cumulatively. It allows that insight to really develop rather than hopping between topics.
That makes sense. Do you have a concrete example of how that might look?
Sure. So instead of sort of weaving the poke to the bear idea and the digital constitution point into this broader commentary flow, you could maybe dedicate a whole segment called, say, the escalation of online retaliation. Then have another focused on something like forging a digital constitution for civil discourse.
Okay.
Or, when the discussion turns to the origin of the word Hollywood and spellcasting, make sure that's explicitly tied into the bigger argument about media influence. Frame it clearly, maybe under a segment about the sheer power of mass media narratives.
Gotcha. That leads kind of into the next point, actually. The material is really strong in showing the emotional toll of political violence, especially that chilling bit about normal people cheering on assassinations.
It's deeply concerning, yeah.
But how do we make sure that larger point, the universal so what, really hits everyone?
Right. And building on that, the piece powerfully expresses frustration, concern. You can feel it. But to really elevate it, it could perhaps more explicitly spell out the broader, universal consequences. The stuff that goes beyond that immediate, understandable emotional distress.
Okay, so the distress is there, like with the Rowling example, but the link to the bigger picture might be assumed sometimes.
Potentially, yeah. The specific instances are clear, but the connection to the wider systemic implications isn't always drawn out explicitly. Even those really authentic personal frustrations, like hearing, "I'm tired of it," or "this isn't what I signed up for."
Which are totally valid.
Absolutely valid. But they could be a sort of springboards. Broaden the lens to explore how these behaviors are actually eroding really fundamental things in society.
Like
civil discourse itself, or democratic stability, even just basic community cohesion, things that affect everyone.
So the suggestion is to take that strong emotional core and then consciously connect the dots to those bigger societal impacts.
Exactly. Consistently draw on those explicit lines. Clearly articulate how the trends being discussed, like the picking up the mic movement, or maybe the shift away from free speech absolutism, how these pose major challenges to a functioning society. You're appealing to that shared interest we all have in a stable, ethical public sphere.
Right. Making it less about just one group's experience and more about the collective impact. Can you give an example there?
Sure. Think about the point made about extreme actions driving people away from, say, the Democratic Party, instead of just framing that as a loss for your side. Explore how that kind of political polarization, that radicalization, actually risks fracturing national unity. It damages our ability to find compromise across the board.
Okay, I see.
Can erode moral consensus, how it might create a climate where real-world harm becomes, terrifyingly, more likely affecting everyone, no matter their politics.
Yeah, that definitely elevates the stakes. Okay, final area tone. It's obvious the material comes from a place of, well, passion, real outrage at perceived hypocrisy and aggression, particularly from one side of the political spectrum. That comes through loud and...
It does. The passion is undeniable.
But thinking about reaching the widest audience, could that very passion, or maybe the way it's expressed, sometimes work against it? How might the tone be sort of modulated?
That's a really important question. Because yes, the delivery could potentially be modulated to broaden the appeal, make it more persuasive across different viewpoints, maybe strategically adjust the highly emotive, sometimes confrontational tone. The goal would be to foster an environment for reflection for more listeners, rather than primarily reinforcing shared outrage among those who already agree.
Okay, so the weakness isn't the passion itself, but maybe the language used sometimes.
It could be. The passion is authentic, which is good. But especially when critiquing, say, the perceived far, far left, the language can become highly charged. There's sometimes an us versus them framing. Phrases like, you guys are fucking stupid, or they're the tolerant people. We're none of those things.
And while that might resonate strongly with some,
it risks alienating others. Potential listeners who might actually agree with the core message, the message against violence, against intolerance, but they get put off by the strong partisan feel or the aggressive communication style.
Right. So what's the suggestion to maintain the passion, but maybe broaden the tent?
Keep the genuine passion, definitely, but consider reframing some observations and critiques so they appeal more to universal values.
Like what sort of values?
Things like basic humanity, moral consistency, the common good. It involves choosing language that invites thoughtful consideration, maybe encourages dialogue across different viewpoints. Really focus on the detrimental impact of these divisive behaviors on everyone, rather than focusing quite so much on lamenting the actions of specific groups.
Finding that shared ground again. Even when the topic is divisive, can you give me an example of that reframing?
Yeah, absolutely. So instead of describing a lack of empathy with something like, they demand it, but they have none, you could phrase it as maybe a concerning decline in shared humanity and basic moral principles. And then you use the examples, like the reactions to the Kirk assassination discussion or the targeting of J.K. Rowling, to illustrate that broader point.
Okay.
Or when discussing double standards firings, calls for violence, instead of zeroing in on the hypocrisy of the left, focus on the wider problem, inconsistent moral application, the danger of condoning violence from any political viewpoint. Reinforce that core idea that, the right thing to do doesn't have a side.
That makes sense.
And you could even use figures like Chris Pratt or Coldplay, as mentioned, not just as examples of being targeted, but to emphasize how maybe despite perceived leanings, they chose a path of, say, humanity, setting an example for those universal principles.
Got it. That's really helpful. Okay, so to recap brief, we've talked about three main areas for enhance. First, building a more cohesive narrative structure, maybe using focused segments to really let the points build and land with force.
Right, tightening that flow.
Second, explicitly connecting the specific incidents and the understandable emotional reactions to their broader, universal societal implications, really nailing down that so what for everyone.
Articulating the bigger stakes.
And third, strategically modulating the tone, keeping the passion, but maybe reframing some of the more charged or confrontational language to appeal to shared values, fostering wider reflection rather than just reinforcing existing viewpoints.
Exactly. Focusing on shared humanity and consistent principles.
These all seem like really actionable ways to make the material even more powerful and ensure it resonates as broadly as possible. We definitely encourage you to think about implementing these suggestions. And of course, feel free to submit the refined material back for another look.